Task Force Social Security event. I'm Patrick Motherwell, co-founder of S4. I'd like to thank our speakers, Senator JimDeMint, Representative Kolbe, David John, Max Pappas, Karen Lucas, and Jim Martin for being here today. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, 60 Plus, Accuracy in Academia, Americans for Prosperity, Freedom Works for our grandchildren, and the Independent Women's Forum. I can remember about a year ago when we had our first Big Hill events. They had just over 300 members at the time, and it was the first time any of us had ever done an event of that size. But we were held together by a common mission, Social Security. S4 has come a long way since last summer. We've had panel discussions, debates, rallies. We even sent our activism director, Evan, to the beach in an ostrich costume to recruit members. All the while, our organization has become stronger. We found more and more excited and motivated people to help, and our membership has expanded to over 3,600 members in 208 chapters across the country. The fact that so many of you are here today just shows that young people out there want reform. We're going to keep pushing our representatives until they can join today's movement and say it's time to step up and make a difference. To fix Social Security, not just for today's retirees, but for all generations. Thanks so much, and don't stop by our after party at 6 p.m. at 1700 Pennsylvania Avenue. Our first speaker is Senator Jim DeMint. Senator DeMint comes from South Carolina and was first elected to the House of Representatives in 1898. After serving 3 terms in the House, he was elected to the Senate in 2004. Senator DeMint has been a champion of Social Security reform in the U.S. Senate, and he has demonstrated his unwavering commitment to personal retirement accounts by sponsoring legislation, advocating reform, and keeping this issue at the forefront. At S4, we call him a rock star for reform, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce U.S. Senator Jim DeMint.
I know this group is thinking big, because when they put a bottle of water next to your chair for one speech, it's either a long speech or this is one big bottle of water. It's great to see all you warriors, troops for a big issue come to D.C., and I hope you leave here challenged that you can actually make a difference. I think it's a great thing at a young age to really believe you can make a difference. And that's what this is all about, is that this is your country, it's a country we the people, and until we act like that, we're not going to make things happen that need to happen. I think a lot of young folks don't have as much vision as you do, and when they think about Social Security, they're thinking that's something for old people. But the fact is, once you get my age or older, it doesn't make much difference how we change it. But for you at your age, there's an opportunity here, and so I'm glad you're in the fight. I was with the President a couple of months ago at the White House, and someone just asked him, how did he want to be remembered? And he talked about it for a little while. He didn't want to be remembered as a wartime president or someone who was led our troops into Afghanistan and Iraq. I think he wants to be thought about as someone who did the right thing when we were confronted with terrorists. But he said, I want to be remembered as the ownership president. And that's a very wise thing to say, because I think he knows, as far as being free and really feeling like you have some control of your own destiny, you got to own something. And he mentioned home ownership. He mentioned owning your own health plan. But he really focused on Social Security, because it would make such a big difference. The big difference is this. You arrive at retirement after putting over 12% of everything you make your whole life into the Social Security program. And none of that money is yours, any of it. You're going to government and politicians and election to get that money back. But what if just 2 years out of college you were working and you saw that money going into an account that you got a statement that first there were a few $100s the first year and then a few $1,000s, and by the time you retired, over $1 million in a Social Security account that was yours, that no politician could hold over your head. I mean, in fact, everything you do in your life, knowing that money's going to be there for you when you retire. Instead of right now, a lot of folks, when they're polled at your age, don't believe Social Security will ever be there. But they will start seeing that FICA man on their paychecks, and a lot of you have already seen that already. That's only half of that what actually comes out of your pay. You see half. But even a person who never made more than minimum wage their whole life could be a millionaire when they retire if all of that went into their own account. But I think most of you wouldn't be here today if you didn't know what was happening to it. Because this is a promise that this country makes to seniors. But every dollar that I've put in Social Security my whole life has already been spent. And unless we change something, every dollar you put in Social Security, we spend. before you get retirement. And we don't save one penny of it. And the whole hope of politicians is that there'll be enough people working to pay the benefits of those that are retired. And that was a great idea when there were about 40 people working for everyone that's retired. But by the time you retire, there'll be about 2 people working for everyone that's retired. And that's just not enough to support what you're putting into Social Security. So Social Security is now a pay-as-you-go or bet on the come type program. And we can change that. But not only change something financially, but change our culture. Because the way you think when you're 65 with $1 million in your bank account versus being dependent on the government is a totally different way of thinking. And to own something, to be a master of your own fate, so to speak, is to be free. And that's what the American culture is all about. And when we build our whole culture, our whole retirement system on the fact that when you retire, you're going to be dependent on the government for your health care and your income, we're not promoting the American way of life at all. We're promoting dependency on the government, which is not a country you want to help develop. I believe with the President of the office, who still sees this as his major agenda, that we have a chance with your help. When you start pushing it from the youthful side, we have a chance to win. Because folks who are getting ready to retire don't want us to touch the program. But if you make an appeal to them that we're not going to touch your Social Security, but we want your help so that your children and grandchildren have a better program, one that they can really help us. And we can make that pitch and we can make that statement. But we need you out there. A lot of great things have been in the world, whether it's getting rid of slavery or other things for many, many years. And this is probably going to be a fight we've got to get for. But we need to fix it in the next few years if we're going to have a chance to fix it right. Because if we don't start taking part of what you put into Social Security in over the next few years, if we don't start saving at least part of that, then the only way to fix Social Security is going to be what we did many, many times in the past. And that's to raise your taxes and cut your benefits. Because you're not going to raise taxes and cut those already retired. It's going to be you who are paying more for less. And the thing you do as a political activist, this is where you need to focus. Because this would affect your generation and every country, but it would affect the whole of our country, our whole perspective of freedom. That people in this country should not be dependent on the government. They should be free, they should be able to keep what they earn, and building savings and ownership is a way to do that. So thank you for coming to Washington with us. We've had some good signals this year, even though the President blocked us from getting on the floor. We did have one vote in the Senate that would just stop spending the excess Social Security on other things, what we call surplus. 60, 70, $80 billion a year that we don't need for retirement benefits, they're just spending on other things. And so no one tell you we can't stop spending that. And we got a vote in the Senate. This was one day because we did it as an amendment, they weren't able to block. We got 46 people to vote that we should set up a reserve fund for that surplus. I think if we'd had just a little bit more pump from the outside, we could have passed that. We're going to keep trying until we get that surplus off the table. That's the first step in this battle, because then people will really see that there's money there. And that if we save it and set it aside, then we'll have that seed money to begin that personal savings accounts that can change your life and our culture. So again, as I started, thanks for being involved. Thanks for believing you can make a difference. Because if there's any group that can make a difference in this debate, it's you. New voters, new workers, folks who know that they're really getting ripped off if they stay in this program as long as I have. So thanks for coming to Washington, and I look forward to continuing this fight with you, and we're going to win it over the next few years.
Our next speaker is Arizona Congressman Jim Kolbe, a staunch advocate for Social Security reform. He's retiring at the end of this year and has been a long-time supporter of the cause. We'll be very sad to see him go. In 2002, he pushed for Congress to acknowledge the long-term problem and options that we must look at to save Social Security. Last year, Congressman Kolbe co-sponsored a bill with Congressman Alan Boyd to set up personal retirement accounts, creating the only bipartisan plan on the subject. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce to you Arizona Congressman Kolbe.
Well, thanks a lot. It's great to be here. You got the real experts sitting over here, and they're patiently waiting to tell you like it really is here. So I'm going to make my comments short. I don't know whether we have any time for a question or two. I'd rather do that. You know, Jim DeMint and I are good friends. We don't have the exact same proposal for solving the problem, but we basically agree on the basic issue, and that is that we need to do something about this problem. Now, he's a current sitting senator and is going to be running for re-election. I'm retiring at the end of this year, so I can tell you like it really is and not worry about pulling any punches. Folks, the current Social Security system that we have for young people like you is a big Ponzi scheme. It's not going to be there to give you Social Security when you get ready to retire, unless we do something about it. And that means either cutting the benefits or raising the taxes. Two really great alternatives, isn't it? That you get to pay more into a system in order to get less out, or you get less out and keep paying a lot of money. We need to do something about Social Security. The problem is, well, I'm sure it's already been explained to you. You've heard it from others. You'll continue hearing it, but it probably doesn't hurt just to have it repeated. The problem is simple. We're living too long. People are living longer. That's good news, obviously. People are living longer. They're living longer and healthier lives. They're working somewhat longer, but they're living a lot longer. And at the other end, people like you, when you get through college and you get married, you're starting your families later. And families, children deferred generally means smaller families. And that means fewer people in the workforce paying the Social Security tax to support the larger number of people who are retired. And that's a scheme which obviously leads to a problem down the road. It's pretty obvious what the kind of problem is that we've got. We don't have enough taxes coming in to pay the Social Security benefits that are being promised to people. And just keep in mind that Social Security is not, despite all the things that we use, words and phrases that we use to support it when it was invented, Social Security is not an insurance plan. It's not an investment on your behalf. It's a tax that's collected from working people today to pay benefits to people who retire today. The contract is a social contract. That, as Jim DeMint said, when you get ready to retire, there'll be somebody there to pay the taxes for you. But you're going to be paying, there won't be people there to pay the taxes for you when you get ready to retire. There just simply won't be enough people to pay those taxes. So somewhere, long before you get ready to retire, some massive change is going to have to take place in Social Security. Now, we often say the year is 2040. Well, that seems like a long ways away. It's 35, 34 years away from now. Not that long when you think back where we were 30, 40 years ago. It's not that far back in history. It's not that far forward. But that isn't the key date. The key is something much, much closer now, about 10, 11 years now. And that's when Social Security starts having less benefits or less taxes coming in than are necessary to pay the taxes each month. And that's when they have to start cashing in all this paper, this IOUs that they've got out there, that they've been saving up with the additional taxes that have been coming in all these years, and they've been turning around and loaning it from this side of the government, Social Security side, over here to this side of the government, the rest of the government, where we spend the money. Here they've been loaning over here, and suddenly they've got to say, we need that cash. So government of Treasury over here says, oops, we got to go out and borrow money to get the cash, pay the Social Security benefits over here. So the deficit, if you're worried a little bit about the deficit today, and you ought to be worried about the news that's coming down, that means it's going to go up in 6 years because the massive borrowing that's going to have to be done to pay Social Security benefits over here as we cash in those IOUs is going to lead to a tremendous increase in the deficit. So our real problem starts much sooner than waiting until Social Security literally has no more money, even on paper, to pay the benefits. Why is this really such an important one for all of us? Two things that I want to leave you with. One is there's a social contract that's involved, that we make a promise to people when we pay these kinds of benefits. And we ought to be able to keep that promise for people that are your age as well. Now, don't worry about the fact that Social Security is going to change. We've changed it. Some people say, oh, you can't change Social Security. Baloney, we've changed Social Security some 35 times since more than that, actually, with changes in the tax rates, with changes in the benefits, with adding disability, and with adding this, that, or the other thing, taking this out, adding more tax. We've changed it a lot through the course of the years that it's been in place. So we can change Social Security. But if we're going to, the only prospect is that your prospect, for you, it's going to be more taxes now and less benefits later to a system that's already a negative rate of return. It's a negative rate of return for you as a young person starting out working today. That is, you're going to get less back in benefits than you pay into it. Now, that's a great retirement system. pay in $1,000, you get $900 back when you get ready to retire for it. That's essentially what you've got, a negative rate of return on the Social Security system that you're paying into now. If that's the only promise that we can give you, that's bad. And that's why doing something about it means creating a personal retirement account. A personal retirement account where a portion of the taxes, yes, we're going to continue to pay grandmas and your folks' Social Security benefits, but a portion of the taxes you pay ought to be able to go into some account that earns something for you. It's invested for you. 401k. Everybody in the federal government, including myself, has a 401k. We allow it for all federal employees. We expanded it to include all the military now. You take a little bit out of your paycheck. The government matches it with some money. It goes into an account. You decide how you want to invest it. And you can actually see it grow through the years. And it does grow. I don't care what you say about the stock market, or unless you believe this country's on a long-term downtrend, you're going to make money from investing. And if you're a little bit leery about investing in equities, okay, invest in bonds. Less return, but a little less risk. And if you want absolutely no risk, go ahead and put it in treasury bills, government instruments, a lot less return, but still better than what you're getting now with your Social Security tax, which is an almost 0%, which will be a negative rate of return for you. So you'll be better off in any of those instances if you had someone to put some of that money in. Then you can say, well, I'm still paying all these taxes, but at least part of this money is actually getting saved for me. And the second point that I want to leave, the thought that I want to leave with you is kind of the broader one, and that's about these entitlement programs. You know, you come to Washington, you think Congress is making all these decisions about how our budget, how we're going to spend our budget, how we're going to spend the money, the taxpayers' money. Wrong. We don't. We don't make decisions about less than half of all the taxes that are collected, because those decisions are being made, or were made, years ago when we set up programs like Social Security, like Medicare, like Medicaid, like farm subsidy programs that are what we call entitlement programs. You reach the age of 65, or now 65 and a half, and you work 10 quarters, and you're entitled to your Social Security payment. You reach the age of 65, and you're entitled to have Medicare, and so on with each of those entitlement programs. So to change the amount of money that we spend on those programs, you have to go back and change the underlying law, which is very difficult because it means either making more taxes or reducing the benefits if you're going to try and keep them in balance there with the way the programs have been going. And nobody wants to do that. So what happens is the entitlement programs keep eating a larger and larger pie of the total spending budget of the federal government. When I was a youngster, when I was your age, it was about 25% of the total budget that was in entitlement programs. Then we came along and created Medicare and Medicaid programs. And it zoomed from there on. When I came to Congress, it was about 40%. It's over 50% today. And in less than a decade, it will be over 60%. Almost 2/3 of all the spending is being done on automatic pilot. That leaves 40%, a little less than 40%, for everything else the government does. You take defense out of that, and you take Homeland Security out of the two kind of essential things that we do. We have about 15 or 18% of the budget to do everything else, whether we're talking about education, law enforcement, environment, the national parks, highways, everything that the government does, everything else that the government does is being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed again. And so all these groups come to Washington and scream at and say, you've got to put more money here. The problem is we don't have money because we're being squeezed by the entitlements. Congress has got to have, the American people, and then Congress has got to have the courage to stand up and say, you've got to make some tough choices. That's what entitlement reform is all about. And I didn't wait till I was retiring to do this. I started doing this about 12 years ago and calling for entitlement reform on Social Security. My thinking was, Social Security is the easy one. Medicare is the tough one. Let's deal with Social Security now. Let's deal with that problem, and if we can deal with that, then we can go on and show that we have the will and the courage, and it's not touching the electric fence. We don't die from doing this. But folks, if we can't get the courage to deal with Social Security and to fix it, how are we ever going to get the courage to deal with the really humongous problem that we've got out there, which is health care, which is Medicare, which is consuming more and more of our entitlement spending? So the fact that you're here today, that you've come to Washington, that you have an interest in this, and you're going to go back to your schools, your campuses, your colleges, and talk about this issue with other students and begin to mobilize a force that can bring about real change. That's the key. We've got to have young people, your grandparents worry every day about their Social Security. Is their Social Security check going to arrive on the first of the month. They're very concerned about that. This is way in the distance for you, but it's not so far in the distance because you're paying taxes on it every day, and you're going to be starting families, and you're going to be worried about having enough money for your families and to pay for their education. These are very real things for you to do today, these issues for you to deal with now. And you need to get mobilized. You need to make sure that we have a concern. And there are a lot of different ways we can go about this, but you need to say to legislators, to members of Congress, senators, and representatives, I expect you, I elect you to go back there, to have the courage to deal with some of these things. And I promise you, this is what you should be saying to them, I promise you, if you have the courage to deal with that I will support you. I may not agree exactly with what you've done, but if you have the courage to stand up and do something about it, I will stand there with you. That's what members of Congress need to hear. They need to hear those kinds of words from constituents to know that they can have the courage to deal with this problem. Your being here is extraordinarily important, and I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time from your summer schedules to be here, whatever you're doing, whether you're working here as an intern this summer, whether you're coming from outside the city. I appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to come here and to understand this issue, because you are going to make the difference. This is going to determine whether the United States is fiscally solvent and survive fiscally in the future, whether we have the courage to deal with these issues. So thank you very much, and I look forward to having a chance to work with you on this issue. One or two questions. Anybody got one? Okay, two. If we've got anybody got a question they want to ask, and I can say everything so perfectly that it was there. I saw somebody way in the back, and you were pointing at somebody. Okay, in the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you talk about the personal funds, I believe the Social Security program started this way to ensure that people, when they were older, could afford to retire, even if they couldn't afford to save money over the course of their lifetime, back in like the Great Depression and stuff like that. If you're depositing into your own fund, what are we going to do to make sure that people who earn stuff like minimum wage, which is barely enough to live on, can retire if they haven't been able to save that much money over their life? Like, not everybody can have a Social Security fund that they built up to millions of dollars over their working life.
Well, two things. One, we're not charging you any more because you're going to be paying the same amount of Social Security tax. Our plan does have a reduction in benefits because we're going to carve out a piece of that tax that you're paying, 12.4% tax that you're paying for retirement now, and we're going to put it into an account. We have a special program for low-income people that get less, that the government matches it at an even higher rate. So there's a very special thing so that everybody will have something in there. But if you start at age 21, putting the very minimum amount in there out of your earnings there, and you allow that to accumulate over 45 years, and it'll be at least that by the time you get ready to retire. If you allow that to accumulate over that time, it's going to be a very large amount of money. So we do recognize the fact that some people have a lot less money they can put into this 401k. And so we have a special provision at the bottom to help to supplement that in the bill that we've introduced. Thank you.
We should probably actually move on.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Our next speaker is David John. David John is at the Heritage Foundation and is Heritage's leading expert on Social Security reform, having written, lectured, and testified about the issue extensively. In 2001, he provided detailed analysis on the structure and regulation of personal retirement accounts to the President's Commission to Strengthen Social Security. It's my pleasure to introduce to you my friend David John.
One of the worst things you can do is be a speaker and follow those two. So I hope your expectations are properly ramped down at this point. I'm here actually not just as a heritage person, well, that's a major part of it. I'm also here as a father. My 20-year-old daughter, Meredith, is just finished her second year at Villanova, and she's studying nursing. And she'd be here today, except for the fact that she's working a 12-hour shift at Georgetown University Hospital. She's getting a dose of the real world much faster than she might have anticipated. But my worry is for Meredith. Meredith faces a world right now where she's going to pay 100% of her Social Security taxes. She's going to pay 100% of the IOUs in the trust fund that are supposed to pay benefits between 2017 and 2041. And she's going to retire 10 years after the last of those bonds in the trust fund is gone. And at that point, she's going to get 70 cents on the dollar, roughly, of her Social Security benefits. Now, that really wasn't the way I intended for my daughter to inherit a new world. I had hoped that we do better and not worse. We have done worse. In 2040, you can figure out how old you are, you're going to be at that point. In 2040, you're going to have all of your payroll taxes, which are in your payroll under FICA, that are going to go to Social Security and Medicare. Of all your income taxes you pay that year, 15 cents are going to go to pay my Social Security benefits. Thank you. It's about all you're going to get for it, but that's 50 cents is going to go to pay health care, which means that all the programs for your kids, including defense, schools, environment, highways, etc., are going to be paid from 35 cents on the dollar, as if we do nothing. Now, we can put in Social Security accounts. Social Security accounts are simple and easy to operate. Most normal people don't have MBAs in finance. Most normal people, when they look at investments, at least have a short period of time where they panic. I do, and I've got an MBA in finance. So how are you going to fix these accounts? How are you going to invest them? We're going to set them up so that the best decision you make is not to make a decision. You'll have an account unless you say no. If you don't want an account, you don't have to have one. The amount that goes into your Social Security account will be set. You don't have to decide that. And unless you choose another investment, and frankly you're better off if you don't, your money is going to go into something called a lifespan account or lifestyle account. They're basically the same thing. And that's the automatic transmission of the financial world, where rather than having to set out, all right, now I want 4.25% to go in such and such an account, or try to pick out a stock, which is a loser's game over the long run. It's going to be set as a mix of funds. When you're younger, most of your money is going to go into stocks. You're not going to be retiring for a time. By the time you get older, most of your money is going to be in bonds and other types of fixed investments. What that means is that you'll have had the growth opportunity, but you won't have the risk. So if the stock market goes to hell in a handbasket 2 years before you retire, you can read that in the newspaper and go, but it's not going to affect your retirement because most of your money will be out of stocks at that point. You don't have to be a financial genius. That means, in addition to everyone in this room, basically the people who are on assembly lines, the people who are sweeping floors, the people who are filling prescriptions, the people who have better things to do with their life than make investment decisions will be protected. That's a much better future for you. At that point, you will have a case where you're still going to pay 100% of your taxes. You'll still have a case where you're going to end up paying 100% of the IOUs in the Social Security Trust Fund. It's a lot of money. But you're going to end up with 100% of your benefits. You're going to end up with a much better opportunity. You're going to end up basically with the kind of retirement security that I'll have and that my grandparents had. That's a much better kind of a world. That's the kind of a world I want to leave to my daughter. But it's going to be up to you, because you're the ones who are going to be paying the bill. It's your money. It's your retirement future that's at stake. So it's up to you to make sure that it happens. Thank you.
Jim Martin is both the founder and president of the 60 Plus Association, an organization comprised of 5 million seniors nationwide. Jim is a tireless advocate for real Social Security reform, and we're glad he's here with us today. And actually, his organization also recently published a magazine called Senior Voice. It's a great alternative to ARP the magazine, so I think you should definitely push all your grandparents to sign up for it. Help me introduce Jim Martin.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for that introduction. I know a lot of you in this room, and I worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years. I came here in 1962 as a newspaper reporter when John F. Kennedy was in the White House, Neil Armstrong had not yet walked on the moon. Strom Thurmond was still a Democrat. He was the junior senator then from South Carolina, too. And only Barry Goldwater saw into the future that there were some things wrong with this particular system. And I say that in respect to the other fellow from Arizona, Jim Kolbe, who was just here. Perhaps he was a youngster then in those days and realized that Barry was onto something. And don't get me wrong here. When Goldwater made a comment about Social Security, to give you a little bit of historical perspective on this, he didn't publish a white paper in the snows of New Hampshire running for president in 1964. He was asked about the system. And Barry was known sometimes to shoot from the hip, as certain other folks do in this town. But he just said, structurally, I see something wrong with the system down the road. Well, immediately, you won't remember this, folks, but I guarantee you your grandparents will. The ad on television, on black and white grainy TV, color still wasn't perfected in those days. The old television set showed a giant Social Security card blow-up of it with a pair of scissors cutting through it, with a voice ominously intoning that this would be the result if you voted for Barry Goldwater. Well, it was false then, it's false now. 44 years later, 42 years later, I guess, we still have it. One party, unfortunately, has played this card, scaring seniors into the voting booth for over 40 years. I came here, as I said, in '62 as a reporter. I covered that particular race, and I did cover the assassination of a great president, John F. Kennedy, a sad moment in our nation's history. So I've seen a lot of history come and go in this town, and I got to tell you, Social Security, it's going to be there for future seniors, but we got to fix it. And what Jim Kolbe said, what David John said, and what others are going to tell you about, it can be done, and I would mark to this. Under President Clinton, his Social Security Advisory Board back in the mid-90s, 1990s, they came up with a report, 13-member board, and it's not easy to do, obviously, or we wouldn't be having these forums. But his 13-member advisory board issued 3 reports, a 6-person report, a 5-person, and a 2-person. But one common thread ran throughout all 3 reports, and that was that we need to move toward, I like to call it a personalized system, privatized, if you will. That we need to go that route. Even a majority of Democrats were acknowledging in the mid-1990s that that has to be the route we go to save it for future seniors. And let me just mention this one thing, that we talk about the money paid in. When the system started, no, I wasn't around when it started back in 1935, but my favorite senior, my mom, my sainted mom, my favorite senior citizen, depends on her Social Security, her check. She worked until she was 84, 85 years old into her lifetime. And she depended on her check, but she said, son, we know it's there for us, but it's for those future generations. And I got to tell you, when I started the 60 Plus Association about almost 15 years ago, I had a young fellow working for me in his mid-20s. He kept coming up to me, Jim, we got to talk about Social Security. I'd say, Matt, get away from me. Don't touch the third rail. Can't go there. He would stick things in my briefcase at night, and I'd read about it. I said, you know, he's on to something here. My honorary chairman is an 85-year-old former congressman from Indiana, Roger Zion, the Honorable Roger Zion, who served 4 terms here in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, the problem is that we seniors were supposed to, as someone said, we conveniently died at about 65. That's no longer the case. I had the big 7-0 a few months ago, and I look forward to some more of those birthdays and those Social Security checks that I receive monthly. But we no longer conveniently die at about 65. That's the good news for us seniors. The bad news for you young folks, you have to pay for it. And instead of conveniently dying at that age, the system worked marvelously back then. That first recipient was a retired school teacher from Vermont named Ida Mae Fuller, who, her very first check, this was probably a harbinger of things to come, her very first check was about $22.50, David, you probably know for sure. That was more than she paid into the whole system when she started. It was a 2% tax on $3,000. That's $60 a year. That's a $5 bill. I started to say a sawbuck. A sawbuck is $10, an old-fashioned word. Half a sawbuck. Now it's 12.4% on $94,200, almost $1,000 a month. It's still not working. Aren't those 30 or 40 workers paying in? And we seniors are no longer dying at about 65. As my chairman mentioned, Roger Zion said, he likes to say at age 85, he says, I've been statistically dead now for about 20 years. The fact is, Roger is still alive and in good health up in Indiana, and he's gotten more out of the system than what he paid in. But it's the future generations that's not going to be there. And the Medicare that Jim Kolbe mentioned, Congressman Kolbe, I worked on Capitol Hill down on the House side for a member of Congress from Florida. I was chief of staff to a future senator from Florida named Ed Gurney when Medicare passed in 1965. And while some say that Republicans oppose these, that's nonsense. Both sides have to come together when they have good ideas and work through. My boss voted for it. He was a congressman from Florida. He's a Republican. So he voted for it here. And I would dare say that today, if FDR were alive, he came up with a wonderful program back in the Depression era for seniors, and it served seniors excellent for the years. But FDR, I believe, would now endorse those ideas that are being put forward, not just by Republicans, but by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a liberal Democrat from New York. The fathers, he loves Social Security as well as any member on the Hill. He's worked hard on it. Bob Kerrey, former Democratic senator from Nebraska. Jim Kolbe, of course, Republican from Arizona. His counterpart was Democratic Congressman Charlie Stenholm from Texas. They worked together with Kolbe, Stenholm, caucus to try to reform Social Security and fix it for future generations. And to talk about the trust fund, I laughingly, jokingly call it the Social Security bus funds. No trust, there's no money there. And it's not just now with Republicans in charge. Don't listen to this business about, well, they're spending it too. Listen, every Congress has done it, Democrat as well as Republican, for over 40 years now, spending it on other projects. I like to quote Democrats when I can, and Ernest Hollings, Senator Hollings, former senator from South Carolina, who just retired, used to call it embezzlement. That if you did this in private business, you'd be thrown in jail, taking those monies that were supposed to be for the trust fund and spending it on other programs. So I like to say that personalized accounts are the wave of the future. I think with 30-some countries, more than almost 40 countries now, picking up on what little Chile did 20-some years ago. And let me end on that note. I was debating a union leader in New York City a few years ago, and at the tail end in Q&A, she got up and she said, Mr. Martin keeps talking about Chile and workers, how they bought into this system in all these countries. She said, I've represented union folks for over 30 years, and she said, I got to tell you, I got to be very upfront with you. She said, my husband and I are now retired. We have college degrees. We know how to invest in the stock market, but the average worker does not know how to, implying that you have to read the Wall Street Journal every day. So I got up and I said, well, I too have a degree, a college degree, and I don't know how to invest in the stock market, but the implication that the workers in Chile have to read the Chilean version of the Wall Street Journal is absolute nonsense. You have managers, financial managers, that have a fiduciary responsibility to get you the best return possible. Let's do what the Congress does, as Congressman Kolbe says. They have a plan. I like to say it's good enough for members of Congress. It's good enough for senators. It's good enough for seniors. So let's go that way. I got to tell you, I got to pay tribute to the 4 S's. They have a 5th S. I think Patrick will tell you about it later, perhaps. My honorary chairman is a guy named Pat Boone, who's in town today, and I'm getting ready to go meet him. But Pat Boone has been campaigning. Your grandparents will know who Pat Boone is, one of the all-time leading legendary singers of all time. But the 4 S's have got the right idea. Go out there, go out and spread the word. A few years ago, I was asked at a White House conference, Jim, what do we need to do? I said, well, we need to stop getting us old white hairs on the stage with the president. Us old folks. Get the young folks involved. We know it's there for us. My mom gets her check, it automatically sent to her account every month. Same with mine now. But the fact is, it's the young people. Unless you get them involved, we ain't going nowhere for this. I see my time is up. I thank you for yours.
Well, I 5th S has something to do with the screw logo that we came up with. I'll just leave it at that. Our next speaker is Max Pappas. Max is the policy director at FreedomWorks. He's a top policy expert on the issue of Social Security and is often a guest on many nationally syndicated radio programs. And he's also discussed public policy issues on both CNN and PBS. Join me in welcoming Max Pappas.
Thanks, Patrick, but I thought I just came for a free sandwich. I guess I'll talk a little bit about Social Security. I actually came to speak about Social Security because I think this is the biggest issue that we have facing the country right now as far as domestic policy. Because I don't think the crisis is in 2042, as they say, or in 2017. Anybody can debate anywhere in between those. But because I think the real crisis is on Friday, when I get my paycheck, and I look how much they've taken out for Social Security and Medicare, and know that I'm not going to see a whole lot of that back. That's a crisis. They take out about 7.65% of your income for Social Security and Medicare. Your employer pays that much again, which you would get in your salary otherwise. And that's a crisis if they're not going to give that back to me. And as we heard earlier from the Senator, the Supreme Court decided we actually don't have a legal right to that, because what it is Social Security is a tax, and what you have with the Social Security check, according to the Supreme Court, is just a welfare check, like any other check the government gives to anybody. So they can take it away, the 535 guys in this building and the building across the street, and take it away whenever they want. So this is a big deal. I would love to be able to put that 7.65% of my income into an account like I put my 401k money, and save it and own it and take it from job to job and leave it to whoever I want. So this is a big deal. It's the biggest government program in the world. That's another reason why this is such a big deal. And that's why there was so much opposition to changing this. There are many powers that be in this town that want to retain control of the biggest program in the world in Washington, D.C. And what we're talking about with personal accounts is sending that control and that power back out to the people across the country and letting them control their own retirement, instead of having to come with their hat in their hand at 65 and saying, "Please, Congressman, give me that check you've been promising." They can say, "Congressman, you can go to Washington and do what you want to do, but I've got my money in the bank because I've worked all my life and saved that money that you have been taking up until now." So I guess that since it's late, I'll sum this up with three basic quotes and a little bit of discussion on each one of those. Because this is such a big idea, the transformation of the biggest government program in the world into the biggest ownership and wealth-creating system in the history of mankind, I'm going to turn to three big thinkers instead of trying to rely on my own feeble intellect to convey this message. Those are Thomas Jefferson, Adam Smith, and Winston Churchill. Thomas Jefferson said that all from once set in motion will roll around the world. Considering the state when he said that, look around, will take a long way in terms of political freedom and all sorts of other great freedoms. And what I see Social Security is the opportunity to set all of freedom based on ownership, from relying on the government in your retirement from America. Now, everybody in this room who has a tie or pearls on will be relatively free from the government when they get to retirement, because us will all be putting money in our 401ks and our IRAs and saving in a system based on ownership outside of the government. But a lot of people can't afford to put that extra money into us. Those are the lower income workers across America who will depend 100% for their retirement security and their retirement pay on the government. They'll be retiring 100% on a check that we already know the government can't cash. So I think we need to, one, start with Jefferson's quote and get that ball rolling around America of freedom from the government in our retirements. The second quote is from Adam Smith. And it's mainly the idea of how and why we need to do this. I work at a group called Freedom Works, which is a grassroots organization of hundreds of thousands of Americans who are dedicated to less taxes, lower government, and more freedom. And what Adam Smith said was that it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the baker, or the brewer that we expect our next meal, but out of their own regard for their own self-interest. And that's how he basically summed up capitalism. Capitalism works great, but not because the butcher, the brewer, the baker is being nice when they sell us our meal, but because they're making money, and it works out great. We trade them our money for their food. I'd like to paraphrase that for the political explanation on why everybody in this room can make a difference. It's not from the benevolence of the Republicans or Democrats or the independents that we should expect our next major policy reform, but out of their own regard for their own self-interest. And what politicians' own self-interest in is getting reelected. You can't rely on 535 nice and good individuals like the two that we had here today who understand the reason we need this reform. Because most of them are here, it's their job to get reelected. So what we do at Freedom Works and what Students for Saving Social Security do is play on this self-interest and to try to turn that self-interest into political reality. And that's why we heard from the Senator and the Congressman that the way you get this reform is by pressuring your representatives, by calling them and telling them we need this reform. It's easy to explain why Congress rolled over last year and didn't try to pass any reform. The unions and the left beat us. It's as simple as that. They had more people calling into their Congress. Because the unions and the left want the control in Washington while we want it out. So they have a concentrated benefit and a concentrated reason for keeping the benefits in Washington and opposing it. If you want change, there's only one way to do it, and that's play to the self-interest of the politicians, of their desire to get reelected, and let them know that you want change. And that's what we're all trying to do. So I hope everyone in here is going to make a call today and tomorrow and every week for the rest of their lives on good reforms. My chairman of my organization is Dick Armey, and he refers to the group of politicians, which is the majority of them, that responds to this as the Bedwetters Caucus. They're afraid to do anything unless they're just responding to the political pressure. Frederick Hayek, a great economist, said that politicians are just corks floating in the sea of public opinion. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So what we need to do is change public opinion by letting them know what public opinion is. This effort has been beaten down severely by the left over the last several months. But I think for my closing and third quote from I'll turn to Winston Churchill, who delivered this line at a similarly important time in the history of freedom. This issue, as the biggest government program in the world and the biggest evolution of power back to the individuals and the movement of freedom to the individuals over their retirement for a substantial portion of their lives, is this. This is the one issue that we can change that is big enough to determine in the future whether we'll have a vibrant, capitalist, free market economy in America like we have for the last couple hundred years that have made us the most powerful country in the world, or whether we'll have a French-style or German-style socialist welfare economy with rise in the street, with 25% of the people under 25 unemployed. That's why this is this big, and that's why I turned to Churchill when he said, never, never, never give up. So please don't give up. Thank you.
We just have one more speaker, if you can stick around, hopefully for a few minutes. Our last speaker is Carrie Lucas. Carrie's the Vice President for Policy and Economics at the Independent Women's Forum and a Senior Fellow at the Goldwater Institute. She's also the author of The Politically Incorrect Women, Sex, and Feminism, the International View Online. Prior to her work at IWF, she worked at the Cato Institute and the Project on Social Security Choice. Join me in welcoming Carrie Lucas.
Thanks. I'll be real quick. I know you guys have got to get back to work. And as of course, I'm so impressed you guys came out here today. Because of course, as college students and young people, it's really tempting not to want to think about Social Security. But as everybody said, the crisis is today. Each day that you're not able to take advantage of the opportunity to save and invest for your retirement is a day wasted. And I just want to emphasize that this includes the young women out there. Women particularly need to get involved in the Social Security debate. So often, the old guard feminist groups like the National Organization for Women fight with Social Security. They claim that women are needed by anything that gives individuals control over their own money. It's an insulting view of women, frankly, as if we're all equal. But in fact, women have the most gain from Social Security reform. We have most to lose if we let the system continue into bankruptcy. Women live longer, and we often have money at retirement. So it's really important that we make most out of the money that's being saved. We are putting away for retirement, namely Social Security. And then whether you're a full-time worker or you're a stay-at-home mom, you're married, single, divorced, or you're widowed, you're better off in a system that allows for individual ownership and for savings. And I'm happy to talk to any of you, in particular local out there, more specifically after this, about why women should support saving-based Social Security work. And I also encourage you to join the Independent Women's Forum, which is at IWF.org, and to get involved in this and many other issues. So I just want to thank you all for coming here today.
Thank all our speakers for coming out today. It was a really great group. Thank all you coming for this event. Sorry that the lunches ran out. We are just students for saving Social Security, and not a lot of money. So, anyways, thanks for coming.